Stage is all yours.
Thank you, thank you. So, hello everyone, and thank you for being here and not being eating ice cream, so I appreciate that. So, just a few words about me. I am the Global Product Manager for Upschain at EY. That means that I lead our product development efforts globally, specifically for a portfolio which is focused on business applications. So what we do is not finance, it's more focused to the enterprise implementation. We'll see more about that. And my background is really strange because I came into blockchain in 2018 and I started since then developing apps. I didn't care too much about DeFi, finance, cryptos. I went straight into the point understanding how we can use blockchain to make value for companies. And so today I want to talk to you about how we can make confidential business processes on a public blockchain. And basically, this is a very strong problem that today companies are facing because if you think about, there is a lot of confidential data that companies doesn't want to put into blockchains, especially the public ones. And so what we did was building a path over the last 3 years, which has led us to develop some technology, which we'll see. But before diving into this one, I would like to start with what we can actually do today. Because today, if we think about anything that is not finance, we can do many things. Because finance today is a problem due to regulations, due to countries, and so on. So we need to think about everything else but finance. Payments is a very important piece, but it's not the real, let's say, the real business that we can do today on blockchain. And I'm going a bit strong against that, but I know that it's very complex to make finance and payments happening on the blockchain, as we have seen through several talks in those days. What we can really do today is really supply chain. For example, we can do asset management, we can do contracting, we can do product traceability, we can do tracking of public funds, we can also do carbon emissions tracking and offsetting, for example. We'll see more about that. We can do many things, but all those things have been coming through a process, and this process has been really going through several transitions over the years. So the very first transition has been moving from using the blockchain just as a notary. So something like, I can put information, I can stamp it, I can get confirmation about it, and I can use it for proving something. And this has been the number one. The number two transition has been using only cryptos. Today, what we can do is use fiat currencies to settle real business processes using blockchain as an enabler. And this has been something which has been widely acknowledged, and also the, let's say, emerging of stable coins, for example, has been helping this one. The third change has been, in the past, we have seen several projects. One of those, just to mention, it was the trade lens, for example, that has failed because they had created separated ecosystems. And this is something that we need to go over and beyond because we want to get integrated ecosystems. And we've seen that starting to happen through the use of public blockchains. The fourth one is really moving from private, because private can give us a fake sense of security because we can control the infrastructure. But the reality is that companies which participate to the blockchain, they are able to see everything. So the private blockchain doesn't solve the problem of confidentiality. The new challenge, the new change that we need to do is moving from a blockchain which is supposed to be anonymous, sort of, pseudo-anonymous, let's say, into something which can become confidential. So I can do things, I can be identified somehow, and we've seen, for example, through a ENS, which represents my identity, but I'm able to keep the information, the value, and so on that I'm trading, something like confidential that nobody can see until they get, for example, the asset or whatever. And so to make that change, and this is really, I think, a very vital change that we need to make happen, we've been implementing some stuff lately, a couple of products actually, a couple of technology. And both technologies are public domain, so they can be adopted by companies without having to come to EY. First technology is named Nightfall. Second technology is named Starlight. Those two technologies covers the two parts that we see in the slide here. So part one, asset transfers and payments. So basically, Nightfall is a technology that uses zero knowledge to be able to make private transfer of assets. Those assets can be anything, can be ERC20 token, They can be token to track an item on the supply chain. They can be whatever type of token. They just transfer value. And they do that with confidentiality. The second part, the right part of that slide, is private and confidential business logic agreements. That means I am doing business with a third party. I have some agreements with this party. I want to use the blockchain, but I don't want to disclose how much I'm paying, how much I'm getting as a discount or a rebate. And so I'm able to do it with confidentiality. That means I codify everything, but then I execute it without disclosing what I'm actually doing, still getting a proof from the blockchain about that execution. And I will not dig into too much zero-knowledge proofs and technicals because I don't think it's the right place, but basically, a zero-knowledge proof circuit can be reliable as much as a public blockchain transaction, as long as I put some proofs of the computation on the public blockchain. And so, through those two things, let's say we've been able to change things for the ecosystem, not just for UI. And I would reiterate that because our contribution to the community is something that we're very proud of. Nightfall specifically, as I said, is a tool to make movements of assets. So we think about Nightfall as a sort of enabler to create shielding of assets which can be transferred and can be exchanged. And everything is auditable, so we don't have to worry about that, because if I own the token, I can actually see what happened through the use of some off-chain as well, of course, because we can't have everything on the blockchain. And on the other side, and this is something which is really important, Nightfall is also something which is not able to do kind of money laundering, if we think about it, because you need to be identifiable to use Nightfall. You need to have an enterprise validated certificate, which basically identify you as a company or as an entity, and make you available to transact. So we can think like big companies which can work with other big companies without making anonymous transactions, but making point-to-point transactions between themselves without disclosing things. And if we think about it, in several industries, this is a really big problem that they're trying to solve. If you think about pharmaceuticals, for example, they don't want to disclose how many products they produce. It's a competitive advantage. And on the other side, we have Starlight, which we're going to come to a second, but we have also a product with Nightfall, which is really positioned in a very, I would say, important and key way, because it's not something which works in the anonymous things, as I was saying. It's not like Tornado Cash or Zcash. It's something that works with a unique identity of the owner which is doing a transaction. I was coming to Starlight, and Starlight, for me, it's probably something which is going to disrupt things in the next years, because Starlight is, to make it simple, a compiler for zero-knowledge proofs, which means I can take my smart contract, I can put some code inside, and I can make the execution of that smart contract something which is confidential. That means I have my agreement, my pricing agreement, I put all the conditions in the agreement, I run it through this one, and I have a sort of a black box which can iterate and execute every time the agreement. And of course, this is very powerful because we can build potentially any business application with privacy right out of the box. I have a smart contract, I can probably make it private using Starlight. But it's also something that we need to adopt carefully because, of course, we don't want to put bad things or bad outputs, so we need to make sure that what we put in and what we put out of the smart contract still remains sensible for the business. And the two concepts together, so Nightfall and Starlight. So if we put Nightfall and Starlight together, we have what we call Starfall. And Starfall is basically running a business process with confidentiality on a public blockchain using digital assets to be able to track and trace everything. So in this example, we have the main network, which is really where we want to get the reliability. We have the layer 2, which is Nightfall. And then we have the business logic by Starlight. And so let's assume we are in a scenario where we have an agreement to buy some goods. I codify the agreement with Starlight. I send a request to purchase that is processed by Starlight. And then Starlight has a proof of that request, which triggers the creation of the assets with Nightfall. And at some point, once the assets are paid, I can ship them. And the contract, again, will enforce the transfer of the assets. So every time I have a step in the business process, the assets are moved automatically by the Starlight contract. And this is quite powerful, because if you think about it today, we can do that without privacy, but we are leaking all the information that we have about the business process. And let's make it more complex. Let's think about the real world. The real world is very fragmented. We have raw materials, we have manufacturing, we have transportations, warehouses, and then we have distributors at the end, and then we have also the support to give. What happens? Basically, all those systems, they do work with different ERPs. That means that I have my supplier ERP, my manufacturer ERP, my logistics ERP, and my retail system ERP, and so on. All those systems to talk together, they will need significant efforts of integration. And this is proven. There is nothing to say, even if I have SAP to SAP, it's still a project to make the integration. With those kind of processes, and sorry, let me take this one off for a sec, because it's hiding the slide. With those technologies, we can really put all those systems together. They can talk the same language, which is one of the weapons of a blockchain, especially a public one, kind of creating interoperability in the process. So let's make a concrete example of Nightfall, and I'm going to dig in a bit into what we can do. So in Nightfall, let's assume that we create some assets, which are our raw materials. Those materials goes into the processing, and they can be grouped. So we need to think about tokens as a component of our product. So I can put different tokens, which are all private tokens provided by different suppliers with confidentiality. They go into the processing, they are transformed, so those tokens will not exist anymore, and a new token will begin to exist. So we have manufactured something new. Then at some point we have the product ready to be shipped, and this enters the transportation phase. When I'm in the transport, what I can do is aggregate tokens, for example. So I can create a package token, and again, it's going to be kind of confidential because it's still under Nightfall. And when it hits the warehouse, we can unpack the token. And once it is unpacked, we can repack it to sell it, to ship it to the distribution, to the selling point. And we can think all those steps in the real world are quite complex to track in terms of information, are really simple to make in the real world in terms of logistics, right? So doing that with Nightfall gives us every time, anytime, in real time, the information that we need. So a logistic operator knows exactly what he has at some specific point, but also is able to say, okay, the other logistic operator is not knowing how much I handle for my specific client. So this is really a game changer for the use of blockchain. Let's add Starlight to this one. So I have my agreements to buy my raw materials, and those raw materials then needs to be consumed in a certain way in the production process in the manufacturing side. So every time I have, for example, a low stock, which is managed through Nightfall, I can issue a new purchase order using Starlight and get the new supply immediately into my stock. So I can still get my data in real time. And if we translate this to Starfall, we can, of course, try to combine the two things that I said, and we can really get automated business agreements, automatically enforced, moving assets with full confidentiality. So this is what we think it's needed to get to the point where we can really transform industries and companies, because if we think about ERPs changed the game in the industry, and we do think that blockchain can do the same for the ecosystem. So every company working with other companies needs to work on an open ecosystem using privacy technology to be able to really achieve that vision that we have. And one thing that I wanted to say, because we're running out of time, doing technology itself on the R&D space is not enough, of course. So what we are doing right now is building out some services. We are building those services without thinking about lock-in. So we don't want to lock people in, but we want to enable people to start using those kind of privacy services and be able to do it in an easy way, because those privacy stuff, I can imagine, is not super easy to get and super easy to understand. So building those building blocks, building some products to help speeding up the adoption has been our key goal for the, let's say, last 2 years, more or less. We have presented Nightfall 2 years back in May, and now we have it in production. So it takes a while to get it to the industrialization, but it's definitely doable. And as we're running a bit out of time, I just want to close out by giving you what I think is going to be the path moving forward, which is create tokens for everything, because we think digital assets will be very helpful for every business. Automate the business agreements through the use of smart contracts, with privacy, of course. But ultimately, and this is something which we are observing more and more with a lot of analytics tool coming up, we want to be able to use those data in a real, concrete, and proficient way to create insights for the business. And in this way, we can gather data, still maintaining the right segregation of access to the different information. And I think that's it, because we're running out of time. I don't know if we have 1 or 2 minutes for questions. I will ask our friends here. Abbiamo ancora 1 minuto 2? Okay, I don't know if there is any question. I didn't want to rush, sorry for that, but I got a 5-minute left warning, so I just wanted to...
The terrible 5 minutes
please.
warning.
Yeah, please.
Question?
Thank you. You mentioned that finance is not... are there anything particular you're doing for finance, specifically for finance to take...
With privacy, you mean? Or in general?
In general, possibly, well, privacy is even possibly more important.
No, what I was mentioning is that really finance requires some more attention from the regulation perspective. We need to know who's doing what. We need to prevent money laundering, and we need to make sure that we are following what is existing today as, let's say, non-blockchain, non-crypto regulation, basically. What we have built here is a tool which is, in theory, not supposed to work for finance because it can introduce the risk of money laundering, even if we are doing some kind of validation on the identity of who's doing what. So it's something that requires a bit more, let's say, attention, and also being a big audit firm as well. For us, it's, let's say, we need to take things carefully, but we're definitely looking into finance as well. It's just that we are looking at it not with a product view for now, for those many reasons I mentioned, basically.
Any other question? No, it's all good. Okay, another big round of applause for Federico.